He said it casually, like it was obvious, like her work didn't carry weight, like her name didn't move numbers. A few people smiled. Someone glanced at her, waiting for a reaction. She didn't give one, just a quiet nod, almost polite. But that same evening, something small shifted. A timestamp, a commit, a detail no one noticed. At least, not yet. The room carried that polished, artificial calm only expensive offices managed to sustain. Glass walls, controlled lighting, voices lowered just enough to sound important. Screens glowed with dashboards no one fully trusted. And somewhere between the numbers and the silence, hierarchy did most of the talking. He leaned back when he said it. Not loudly, not aggressively. Worse, casually, like stating a fact everyone already agreed with. She's nobody, just an influencer. A couple of restrained smiles, a quick glance exchange, the kind of micro reactions that never make noise but always leave a mark. She was sitting 2 seats away, close enough to hear every word, far enough to be ignored. Her fingers rested lightly on the table, still, composed, almost detached. No sudden movement, no tightening jaw, no defensive posture. Just a small nod, as if acknowledging a comment about the weather. That was the first thing people would remember later. Not what he said, but how she didn't react. The meeting moved on instantly. Slides changed, metrics returned. Someone started explaining delays in the pipeline, vague language, diluted accountability, the usual choreography of corporate ambiguity. Minor backlog. Temporary slowdown. Nothing critical. She listened. Not the way others did, waiting for their turn to speak or protect their scope. She listened like someone mapping pressure points, quietly aligning fragments, timing, ownership, dependencies. Every word found its place somewhere. Every omission, too. Another update, another deflection. Then a screen share. The repository dashboard appeared, commits, timestamps, status markers. To most, it was noise. To her, it was structure. She didn't lean in, didn't squint, didn't ask questions. But something registered. A gap. Small. Almost elegant in how easy it was to overlook. A delay that had been softened by wording, blurred by team handoffs, buried under normal variance. But the system didn't lie. Not really. People did. She glanced at the timestamp again, then at the speaker, then back to the screen. Still calm, still silent. Across the table, he kept talking, confident, dismissive, comfortable, inside a narrative that had already been accepted by the room. That was his second mistake, assuming silence meant agreement. The meeting ended the way most do, no resolution, just a shared illusion of progress. Chairs moved, laptops closed, conversations split into smaller, safer pieces. She stood up without rushing. Someone brushed past her, already on a call. Another person avoided eye contact, not out of guilt, just instinct. Office gravity pulling everyone back into their lanes. He didn't look at her on the way out. Didn't need to. In his version of the story, she didn't matter. That assumption held, clean, uninterrupted, for exactly 3 hours. Because later that evening, long after the office lights shifted to night mode, one more entry appeared in the repo. No announcement, no message, no noise, just a timestamp. Precise, quiet, irrefutable. And a delay that no longer belonged to her. Not anymore. By morning, it would still look like nothing. But by the end of the week, someone would start asking the wrong questions, and she would still be silent. For now. Morning arrived the way it always did in that office, fast, efficient, and already late for something. By 9:12, the first message landed. Not in the main channel, not where decisions were made, Somewhere safer, a side thread disguised as a routine check. Hey, quick question on the repo timestamps. No names. No accusations. Just curiosity wearing a polite tone. She saw it, read it once, didn't reply. Instead, she opened the dashboard again. The entry from last night sat exactly where it should. Aligned, documented, precise down to the second. No edits, no retroactive changes, clean. That was important, because in that environment, messy data could always be argued away. Clean data? It forced conversations. Across the office, conversations had already started. Quiet ones, fragmented ones, the kind that begin with just checking and end with uncomfortable pauses. Was this always like that? Who pushed that update? Wait, why does the delay point there? The answers didn't arrive immediately. They never do when they matter. At 10:03, the same man from yesterday walked in with the same confidence. Measured steps, controlled expressions, that familiar sense of owning the room before speaking a word. He didn't know yet. Or maybe he did, but not enough. The meeting started on time. New slide deck, same language. Stabilizing metrics? Under control. Minor adjustments. Then someone, not senior enough to lead, not junior enough to stay quiet, cleared their throat. There's something in the repo. A pause. Not dramatic, just long enough. The screen shifted. Dashboard opened, timeline expanded, and there it was. The entry. Timestamped. Logged, anchored, no commentary, no framing. Just fact. The room leaned in without moving. He looked at it for a second too long, then spoke too quickly. That's probably a sync delay. Happens. Confident tone, familiar tactic, but the system didn't support him this time because someone else had already checked. Actually, it aligns with the deployment window. Another pause, slightly heavier. He adjusted his posture, subtle, but visible if you knew what to look for. His narrative was still intact, but now it had edges, weak ones. She sat in the same place as yesterday, same posture, same calm, no notes, no interruptions. Just watching the structure shift. They pulled more logs, expanded the window, cross-referenced dependencies. Each layer removed a bit more of the fog. The delay, the one that had been softened, redirected, diluted, started to take shape again, clearer now, less flexible, and inconveniently precise. Wait, this wasn't her segment. Someone said it carefully, as if testing the air. No one answered immediately, because everyone already saw it. Ownership had moved, not dramatically, not loudly, just accurately. He leaned forward now, not relaxed anymore. Let's not jump to conclusions. The sentence landed but didn't hold, because conclusions weren't being jumped to. They were being revealed. And the more they looked, the less space there was to reposition the narrative. No blame had been assigned yet, but the direction was no longer optional. She finally moved, just slightly, reached for her laptop, opened it, typed something short. No one noticed, not in that moment. But 2 minutes later, a quiet notification appeared in the thread from earlier. A link, direct, clean, full log extract, no edits, no commentary, no interpretation, just the timeline. End to end. That was the third mistake, thinking the system would stay quiet. The room didn't react immediately, but the tone changed, subtle, irreversible. Because now, it wasn't a discussion, it was evidence. And evidence doesn't argue, it waits. By 11:26, someone had already forwarded the thread. Not upward yet, but close enough. By 1300, the question was no longer what happened. It became Who signed off on this? And that question never stays small for long. She closed her laptop. Same calm, same silence. But now the room had shifted around her. Not dramatically, not publicly, just enough. Enough to make people reconsider where they stood. Enough to make one person realize this wasn't going away. And somewhere, quietly, legal would eventually see the same log. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon enough. And when they did, the word delay would mean something very different. If you looked closely, you could already feel it. The moment before escalation, when everything still looks controlled, right before it isn't. If you've ever seen someone dismissed too quickly, underestimated, reduced to a label, written off before the facts had time to speak, this story will feel familiar. Because sometimes the loudest moves aren't made in the room, they're made in silence, long before anyone realizes what's already been set in motion. Watch closely what happens next. And tell me, at what moment did the narrative actually break? Subscribe if you want more stories where the quiet details change everything. By mid-afternoon, the office had split into two versions of reality. One, the official one, still spoke in controlled language. We're reviewing. We're aligning. Let's not overinterpret raw data. It sounded stable, managed. The other version moved quieter, in forwarded threads, in side comments, in that slight hesitation before someone spoke too confidently. Because now, there was a log, and logs don't forget tone. At 14:17, the first escalation didn't happen publicly. It never does. A calendar invite appeared, small, almost invisible among dozens of others. No dramatic subject line, just quick sync, repo timeline. 3 attendees, then 5. Then one more added late. That last addition mattered. She saw the invite, didn't open it immediately. Instead, she checked something else first. The same dashboard, same timeline, same entry. Still clean, still untouched, no edits, no retroactive adjustments. Good. Because this next phase wasn't about discovery anymore. It was about interpretation. And interpretation is where people try to bend facts. The meeting started without her. Of course it did. This wasn't about including her yet. It was about understanding whether she needed to be included at all. Inside that room, voices were lower than usual. Not polite, cautious. Someone shared the extracted log she had posted. Another person overlaid deployment markers. A third cross-checked approvals. Layer by layer, the timeline became less flexible. Okay, so the delay originates here? A cursor hovered over the exact point. Not hers, not even adjacent, clear, uncomfortable. He spoke again, this time slower. Context matters. It was a better line than yesterday, but weaker, because context only works when facts are incomplete. And now they weren't. Someone else asked the question no one wanted to phrase directly. Who validated this segment before release? Silence, short, heavy, not empty, full of calculations, risks, memory checks. Because validation leaves a trail, and trails can be followed. Across the table, one person shifted their chair, subtle, but enough to break the stillness. Another minimized a window too quickly. Small signals, micro movements, the kind that appear when the room stops protecting the same narrative. At 14:29, the first name was mentioned, not hers. And that changed everything. Not loudly, not officially, but structurally. Because once a name enters the timeline, the system reorganizes around it. He leaned back again, trying to recover the same posture from yesterday. It didn't fit anymore. You're stretching this. But no one agreed, not verbally. But agreement wasn't required anymore because the data had already aligned. Outside the room, she remained exactly where she had been most of the day, present but unengaged, not absent, not pushing, just unavailable for misinterpretation. Her laptop was open, one tab, the log, unchanged. She didn't need to add anything. That was the precision of it. No argument, no defense, no correction. Just a structure that held on its own. At 14:41, the meeting ended. No conclusions announced, no decisions formalized, but something irreversible had happened. The question had shifted, permanently. Not, is there a delay? Not, how do we frame it? But, who owns it? And ownership doesn't diffuse once it's found. People exited the room in silence. Not the comfortable kind, the recalibrating kind. He was one of the last to leave. For the first time since yesterday, he looked at her. Not dismissive, not confident, measured, evaluating, trying to understand what she had done. But that was the mistake. He thought this was something she did, when, in reality, she had only not interfered. The system spoke. She just made sure it could. By 16:05, another invite was drafted. Different participants this time, higher, not labeled urgent, they never are. But this one carried weight because of who was quietly added to the thread. And once that happens, the timeline stops being internal, it becomes accountable. She closed her laptop again. Same calm movement, same silence. But now, the structure around her had fully shifted. No one said anything out loud. No acknowledgement, no apology, just space. More than before. And sometimes, that's the first visible sign that the narrative has already collapsed. If you were paying attention, this was the moment control actually changed hands. By the time the second invite went out, the office had already adjusted its posture. Not visibly, not in ways you could point to, but in the pauses, in the way messages were now written, then rewritten before sending, in how people stopped finishing each other's sentences, in how certainty had quietly disappeared from the room. Because this meeting wasn't lateral anymore, it was vertical, the kind where titles matter less than exposure, the kind where language becomes precise, not to sound smart, but to avoid being quoted later. She didn't join immediately. She watched the thread first. New names, legal adjacent, operations. Someone from compliance who almost never appeared unless timelines turned into liabilities. That told her everything she needed. This wasn't about fixing the delay anymore. This was about documenting it. The meeting started at 16:22. No introductions, no small talk. A screen was shared within seconds. The same log, but now contextualized, expanded window, full trace, dependencies mapped end to end, approvals layered on top like transparent sheets, clean, unavoidable. Someone from compliance spoke first. Let's stay strictly on the sequence. No opinions, no framing, just sequence. They walked through it slowly, not because it was complicated, because it was definitive. Each timestamp anchored the next. Each approval narrowed the path. Each absence of action spoke louder than any explanation. And somewhere between 1627 and 1631, the timeline stopped being debatable. Because now it had structure, legal structure, that's the difference. Data can be questioned, structure gets audited. He spoke less this time. When he did, the confidence was gone, replaced with something sharper, more controlled. We need full context before drawing conclusions. Technically correct, strategically late, because context had already been assembled. He just wasn't the one assembling it anymore. Another voice, calm, neutral. Context doesn't alter sequence. Silence. Not heavy this time. Final. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but precise. Because once sequence overrides narrative, control shifts. She joined the call at 16:34. No announcement. Her name appeared in the participant list, and for a fraction of a second, the room acknowledged it without speaking. No one addressed her directly. They didn't need to. Her presence wasn't required to explain anything. That was the architecture she had built. Or rather, the one she had allowed to reveal itself. They continued. Approval checkpoints, ownership markers, handoff gaps. Every layer removed ambiguity, every second removed leverage. At 16:39, the question was finally asked, not softly, not indirectly. Who approved the delayed segment despite the dependency flag? There it was, the exact point where responsibility crystallizes. No one answered immediately, because now it wasn't about being right, it was about being accountable. He leaned forward, spoke carefully. This needs internal review before attribution. It was the strongest move available. Delay the conclusion, control the timing, but even that had limits because the system had already time-stamped the decision, and timestamps don't wait for internal alignment. Someone highlighted the approval line, cursor steady, name visible, not hers, never was. The room didn't react, no shock, no escalation, just recognition, because everyone had already arrived there mentally. Now, it was simply formal. At 16:44, compliance summarized, sequence confirms delayed action post flag with recorded approval. No emotion, no emphasis, just classification. And that changed the status of everything, from discussion to record, from narrative to documentation. He stopped speaking after that, not defeated, recalculating, because once something becomes record, the strategy changes. You don't argue facts, you manage consequences. She said nothing. Not when the sequence was shown, not when the name was visible, not when the conclusion was stated. Because this was never about proving anything. It was about allowing the system to reach its own conclusion, without interference. At 16:51, the meeting ended. No resolution announced, no corrective plan outlined. That would come later. This phase had a different purpose, to establish reality, and it had. As people left the call, the silence followed them. Not empty, defined, structured, final. Within minutes, a new document was created. Internal, restricted, time-stamped, the log attached, the sequence preserved, the approval highlighted, and once that document exists, the timeline stops being negotiable. She closed her laptop one last time, the same motion as before. But this time, it meant something different. Not patience, completion, because the shift had already happened. Quietly, precisely, irreversibly, the only thing left now was what would be done with it. And that part never happens in the open. By the next morning, the office felt lighter, not calmer, resolved. That subtle difference only appears after something has already been decided, just not announced. Conversations were shorter, more precise. People weren't speculating anymore. They were aligning. Because somewhere between 1651 and now, the document had moved upward, not broadly, not publicly, but enough. Enough to reach the level where timelines stop being technical and start being exposure. At 8:43, the first visible signal appeared. A meeting cancellation, not hers. His, no explanation. Just removed from the calendar, clean. People noticed, no one commented, but absence. always gets read faster than presence. At 9:10, access changed, subtle again, a permission shift in the repo, temporary labeled as review state. But everyone who understood the system knew what that meant. Control had been reallocated, not permanently, but not casually either. She saw it, did nothing. That was still the pattern. No reaction, no commentary, just observation. At 9:32, a new thread appeared. Higher visibility this time. Structured, bullet points, neutral language, carefully chosen verbs. Timeline reviewed. Sequence confirmed. Approval under internal review. No names, not yet. Because names are never the first thing to surface. Structure is. Names follow. At 10:05, someone from legal joined the thread. No introduction, no statement. Just a single addition. Documentation sufficient for further action. That was it. One line. But in that environment, it carried weight. Because further action doesn't mean discussion. It means process. Formal, traceable, unavoidable. Across the office, behavior adjusted again. Less noise, more distance. People weren't choosing sides, they were choosing safety. He hadn't appeared yet. No messages, no comments, no attempts to reframe. That told its own story, because silence, when it shifts sides, becomes visible. At 10:47, the second signal arrived, a new calendar block, closed, restricted, different participants, none of them optional. She wasn't on it. She didn't need to be. This phase didn't involve her anymore. That was the final transition, from involvement to outcome. She opened the repo one more time. Same entry, same timestamp, still clean, still untouched. What had changed wasn't the data. It was what the data now meant. At 11:12, someone walked past her desk, slowed down slightly, as if about to say something, then didn't. Not avoidance, recognition, a quiet recalibration of position. Because now, everyone knew. Not loudly, not officially, but clearly enough. By 11:30, the thread had stopped updating. Not because nothing was happening. Because everything important had moved elsewhere. Into rooms without logs, into conversations without timestamps, into decisions that would only appear as outcomes. She closed her laptop for the last time. No hesitation, no second look, because there was nothing left to monitor. The sequence had completed, the structure had held, and the system had done exactly what it was designed to do. Once someone stopped interfering with it. Later that day, an announcement would appear, carefully worded, neutral, detached. Role transition. Organizational alignment. Next phase. No mention of delays, no mention of logs, no mention of what actually happened, because those things never make it into the final version. But everyone would understand, because they had seen the shift happen, step by step, timestamp by timestamp, silence by silence. And somewhere in that understanding, her position had changed, not publicly, not dramatically, but permanently. No applause, no recognition, just space. Authority that didn't need to speak. Respect that didn't need to be requested. And a room that would never again call her nobody. Not after this, not after the system spoke. And she let it. Silence.